Hi all, this is the beginning video on frequency distributions, which is section 2.1 in your textbook. We're heading to a test here pretty quickly, and so our goal at this point is we've learned about what data is and how to collect data, and so now our goal is to start to analyze that data by making some relevant charts and graphs and so forth that'll help us understand it. Okay, get ready for the next slide. So the first thing we want to talk about in making a frequency table is creating what we call classes. And what I have above is a set of data of magazine reading times by students in minutes in, say, a library, and this was a class of students. And I want to know how long they're actually reading the magazines, given that they're going to the library. And what we want to create are something in statistics called classes, or if you wish, intervals. And these are the first parts of making a frequency table. An interval or a class is just a group of numbers that fall within a certain range. So I'm going to show you how to do that in just a sec. So say I wanted to have 5 classes. How would I do it? Well, the first thing I have to do is I have to find the maximum value in the set of data and the minimum value, and then calculate something called the range. And so the maximum value in this set of data looks to be 39. And the minimum value is 0, so the range is just the max minus the min, or 39 minus 0 equal to 39. And then what we do to create our classes, what we want to find is something called the class width. And the class width is going to be a number we determine by taking the range and dividing it by the number of classes. Well, 39 divided by 5 is equal to about 7.8, and what we do is we round that up to 8. And by rounding it up to 8, we have a whole number to work with. So I have now found my class width. Now once we get the class width, what we want to do is create a table. And that table is going to look like this. And we can put label class here, and we're going to start with the smallest number 0, and then we're going to increase by 8 until we have 5. So the next number is 8, the next number is 16, then 24, then 32. And then how do we get the rest of the class or the interval? We take one less than the next number in there. So this is 7, and then 8 to 15, and then 16 to 23, and then 24 to 31, and 32 up to 8 more would be 40, so one less is 39. And there's all our classes. Now if I was given this table first before I was given the data, then I could have still found the class width in another way. What I would have done is I would have taken 2 consecutive numbers at the start of the intervals, and then the class width would have been equal to 16 minus 8, or 8. Now notice how these are the same number. And so there are 2 different ways to get it depending upon where you start. The next thing I want to talk about is what are these numbers called that are listed? Well, these numbers here on the left are called lower class limits, and the numbers on the right are called upper class limits. So what I've done now is I brought our data back in so we could see it, and what we want to do is we want to keep track of the data to find what is called our frequency. We're going to use a tally system. And so given these intervals, I just want to place the numbers in the right interval. So I'm looking right here at the numbers, and then the number 7 I have 1, then 39's here, 13's here, 9's here, 25 is there, 8 is here, and 22 is here. So why don't you pause the video and finish the rest of these tallies. So, did you get the same numbers I have? I have my frequencies as tallies, and in general, they would be these numbers. Let me continue my table. In general, I should have gotten 8 here, 8 here, 3 here, 3 here, and 3 here. And so these numbers are called the frequency, which is just a count of how many that you have. So one of the other things I want to do is I'd like to find something called the relative frequency. So what's the relative frequency? Well, what you want to do is a relative frequency is first you want to add up all this data. 8 plus 8 plus 9 is 25. And then what you want to do is you want to take each number, each frequency, and divide it by the total. So 8 divided by 25, 3 divided by 25, etc. Okay? And when you do that, you can convert it to a percentage, and this will be 32%, this will be 32%, this will be 12%, 12%, and 12%. And you'll notice if you add those all up, they should be right at 100% or just a few decimal points off in case you have to do rounding. And so this is called a relative frequency. What we'd like to do is we'd like to continue the table a little bit more, and we'd like to make what we call is a cumulative frequency. And a cumulative frequency is basically adding the frequencies or the relative frequencies together. So you'd start off with 8, and then 8 plus 8 is 16, and then 16 plus 3 is 19, plus 3 is 22, plus 3 is 25. Or if we have a cumulative relative frequency, it'd be 32%, plus 32% is 64%, plus 12% is 76%, plus 12% is 88%, plus 12% is 100%. And so a cumulative frequency keeps track of what you have as you go along through a set of data. So there's one other term we want to define, and that is called the midpoint. Whoops, can't even spell midpoint correctly. The midpoint of a interval, and the midpoint is, if you're doing this, the midpoint is halfway between the upper class and the lower class limits in each case. So how do you find the midpoint? Well, what you do is you take the upper class limit plus the lower class limit, and you divide them by 2. So in our case, 0 plus 7 is 7, divided by 2 is 3.5. So the midpoint of this interval is 3.5. The midpoint of the next one is 8 plus 15, 23, divided by 2 is 11.5. And you will see that if you add 3.5 to each thing, 19.5. You'll see they're spaced the same way, 27.5, and this one is 35.5. And those are going to be called the midpoint. One other vocab term is called the boundaries. If you notice, right here we have a 7 and an 8. So what's the boundary between those? Well, it's halfway between. So the upper class boundary for this is 7.5, and the boundary on this is 15.5, and the boundary here 23.5, boundary here 31.5, boundary here 39.5. And then you have the boundaries on the bottom. So it's negative 0.5 here, and then here it's 7.5, and then the boundary here is 15.5, etc. So notice it's halfway between the numbers on both sides. Those are called the boundaries. And you can call it a lower class boundary and an upper class boundary. And notice how they're different than the lower class limit and the upper class limit. So here's a problem, and what I want you to tell me is, given this frequency table, what's the width, the min, the max, the midpoints, the upper class limit, the lower class limit, the lower class boundary, and the upper class boundaries. All right? So give that a shot, pause the video, and then you can do it. So we're back. Here are the answers. What's the width? Well, I take 2 consecutive, and so it's 31 minus 20, or that's 11. What's the minimum value? It's 20. What's the maximum value? It's 96. And that's based on the classes, that's all you can say. If you had the data, these might change a little. What's the midpoints of each class? The midpoints of each class, you will add the limits. So for example, you'd have 20 plus 30 divided by 2, which is 25. And so the limit here is 25, 36, 47, 58, 69, 80, and 91. And those are the midpoints in each case. The lower class limits, well, that's the set of 20, 31, 42, 53, 64, 75, 86. The upper class limits will be this whole list right here. All right, starting with 30 and going to 96. What are the lower class boundaries? Well, since all of these upper and lower limits are separated by 1, the lower class boundaries are going to be a half below that. So they're going to start at 19.5, 30.5, 42 or 41.5, 52.5, 63.5, 74.5, and 85.5. And then the upper class boundaries are going to be 1/2 more. So they're going to be like 30.5, 41.5, etc., 52.5, 63.5, etc. So, did you get all those? If not, make sure you ask some questions in class tomorrow. We can try and help you with that. Okay, that's all for now.